So, Tom, do you feel a lot of pressure having to be funny for these podcast intros?
There's no pressure when you're naturally funny.
Well, that's why I'm asking.
Home to stand your ground. 2, 3, 4.
Hi, I'm Becca Clegg, and this is the Inner Alchemy Podcast. Join me in conversations with some of my favorite healers and helpers as we explore all the ways we can restore balance within ourselves. The world heals one person at a time, and the healing starts now. Today's guest is Kristin Sweeting. Kristin Sweeting is an international wedding photographer turned coach for creatives. She is the founder of Dangerous Creatives Mastermind and online course. She also offers one-to-one consulting for creatives looking to expand their business and deepen their impact. She lives in Franklin, Tennessee with her husband, son, and 2 dogs. Welcome to the show. We are so glad to have you on.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
You know, this season is so special to me because we're really having fun conversations about how people take their own personal journeys and use them and actually transmute them in that alchemical way to create amazing things in their life. And I know you talk a lot about your own healing journey and how you use that to kind of come to the conclusion that in your business, you had to be a person first and a business owner second, or rather that you could be both in a balanced way. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because I love that idea.
Yeah. I mean, I've been a photographer for 11, 12 years now. And, when you jump into something that you love, it's so easy for it to become all consuming. And I was a mentor for high school students before that. And so it's just like, you let that kind of seep into all the areas of your life of just how excited you are for your work. And so I did that for a really long time. And then kind of got, my own personal story involves like really working through what does it look like to not believe the faith tradition you grew up in as a kid, and to deconstruct that, and loss of a parent, and a really hard pregnancy and a miscarriage, and a lot of these really personal things that kind of brought me to my knees in a lot of ways and made me realize that like I need to in order to be not just good for my clients and my work, but for myself, I have to focus on being a human first. And that I shouldn't be like pushing down grief or pushing down these really hard experiences for the sake of my creative career. So there's a lot that goes along with that. I'm always really happy to share any part of my story in case it connects with anybody. But I think just like having to walk through that while also being responsible for your business, caring financially for everybody, and caring for all the people you've committed to, it can be a lot of pressure when those things happen at the same time,
It is. And I love what you're saying about being able to experience grief. And, grief is such a concept that I think our culture does not create the space. And we're so uncomfortable with grief in general that we just want to shove it away and push it away. And how I believe that's a part of how we've come to get where we are today, because there's so much trauma and so much grief collectively in our culture that we have never allowed ourselves to experience. And I just think it's beautiful that you're able to express in your own business that by doing that and allowing yourself space for that, and I suppose this is a question, but has it allowed you to experience your business in a better way or a different way?
Yeah, I would say so. I feel like when we let ourselves really experience grief and go through hard things, we become more empathetic, more compassionate, more intuitive, and all of those things are such assets in businesses, and especially creative businesses. So with photography, I feel like when I have let myself grieve or experience something and talk about it and be open about it, I am able to connect with the people I'm photographing on such a different level. People come to me still who have experienced miscarriage or grief or loss of a
Mm-hmm.
parent or a divorce, and they show up not just like, hello, I'm here to have my photo taken, but in
Right.
a way that's like really wanting to be seen and really wanting all the parts of them to be brought to the surface in a
Mm-hmm.
photograph. But also it's this experience of like that vulnerability creates something in art that you wouldn't be able to do if you weren't vulnerable. So I mean, one of the things I say when I'm teaching photographers is like, you have to model what you're wanting your clients to do too. And obviously not from a point of oversharing or like dumping on your clients, but I'm like, when you model vulnerability, it gives someone the space to also be vulnerable and also open up and create that really beautiful magical moment that can happen when you're co-creating with someone.
I could not agree more. And I think bringing back the idea of vulnerability as a strength, not just into our culture, but into our business culture, is such, well, it's an overdue and necessary return of what I like to call like the yang, or that sort of, rather the yin. I always get those two confused, or that feminine energy that doesn't matter what you identify in terms of gender, but we all can operate from, and it's been so missing for so long. So I love this idea that when you're modeling that, you actually are being you're not saying this, but it brings an element to our business that really does profoundly affect it in a positive way, I think. And I see you saying the same.
Oh yeah. When I started making those choices, my business definitely just even, successful on the surface changed,
Yeah.
like it became more, I'm using air quotes, which I know on a podcast isn't helpful, but it's just like, success is whatever you decide that it is.
Right.
But even on the surface level, it became more successful when I really showed up in a way that was authentic and vulnerable. Um, and I can get more into this too, but like a lot of the big jumps in my business also came after totally abandoning something or quitting something or taking the less chosen path or burning down something that was successful that wasn't working for me anymore. It was like making those human first choices that a few steps down the road it made sense, but in the moment maybe it didn't make sense.
And I love this and would love to hear more about that, because I love that your business coaching program is called Dangerous Creatives. And, I want to know more about what led you to picking that name. But as you're talking, I'm thinking, wow, those choices sound scary. I imagine there was some danger in that, or even just choosing vulnerability. Again, in this culture, that can feel really dangerous. So, yes, actually, I'd love for you to share with our audience a little bit more about that and what that was like for you.
Yeah. Well, the Dangerous Creatives name came kind of on the heels of my divorce. I me and my ex-husband both went through a huge faith, like working in the church to then not believing any of it anymore,
Mm-hmm.
which is it's a unique grief in itself,
Mm-hmm.
because your whole worldview all of a sudden dies. Something that like felt really, really important to you just like that. So that was a really big grief we both went through. And then after that, our marriage ended as well. And so I was leading a workshop in Portugal, and kind of have this tension. I mean, I still do. So my last name Sweeting is my name from that marriage,
Yeah.
but it's the name that I branded. It's the name that I became. Like I am that person. But we were having that conversation of like, who am I now? Who am I now? Am I Sweeting? Am I Kristin Sweet, small, like, very approachable, very nice? Like, am I that? And some of the people who were on this retreat were like, you're not Kristin Sweeting anymore. You're Kristin Danger, because you're just like going out and making choices that feel like not safe, that feel totally different than what the first 20, 30 years of your life looked like. Like you're spinning it all right now. And so Dangerous Creatives kind of came from that. Like sometimes we make really hard choices, but choosing to not abandon ourselves, choosing to not abandon our truth, choosing to hold a boundary when someone is pushing up against it or treating you in a way you don't like all those things feel very dangerous, especially when you're in that moment, because you're not flowing with what everyone else is doing. You're not taking the path that feels safe, that feels like people will like you more if you do this. Like you sometimes have to make a choice in that feeling of like, I would rather make people angry than abandon myself.
Mm.
And to me, that's what a dangerous creative is like, I'm choosing not to abandon myself, my creativity, my voice. I'm going to use my voice to say things that are important to me, and not just doing what is popular.
Wow, that is so beautiful. The statement you just made, that I would rather choose to make someone angry than abandon myself. As simple as it might sound to say it, it is profoundly difficult for people to do. I've worked with people for decades and had them make micro movements to get towards that. So thank you for putting that into really beautiful language, because that is a very difficult thing, I believe, for human beings to do. We're so wired for, as Brene Brown says, wired for attachment, right? And that need to
Yeah.
belong. It's very difficult, and it's quite common, I think, that we give away that relationship with self in order to find attachment with the other, and it can be at a cost to ourselves. Um, and so I love hearing you say that so much joy and success, and again, air quotes, success, but has come to you as a result of choosing yourself.
Yeah. I mean, I would say most of my life up to that point was choosing everyone except for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I still think humans are very communal, community driven people. Like I think
Sure.
we can also go too far the other way and be like, you know, self love only, do what's good for you, and cut out all the toxic people in your life. And I do agree with that, but I think you can go too far the other way too, and all of a sudden you're alone on an island and being like, what happened?
Yeah, that pendulum.
I love therapist friends because I'm like, why do we just swing so extreme
Mm-hmm.
from one to the other? And I always love kind of the third way, or like the community driven, also choosing yourself. So
Mm-hmm.
now I'm like, what was the original question that we just
That's okay. No, the original question was just, I really wanted to just sort of highlight, as the listeners were sort of connecting to your story, that it was really scary and you were able to experience great joy as a result of doing that scary and dangerous thing. It's difficult to find support, I think, sometimes in our culture for making decisions that go against the grain. And so, if you're listening and you hear this and you're about to step out into that kind of unknown, I want you to hear both Kristin and I acknowledging that it can really bring you a lot of joy. Your bio mentions that you obviously love travel and you have a lot of experiences in your business with travel and people. So, how did pursuing all of that wholeheartedly lead you to your own healing?
I think it went back to that wanting to experience wholeness, wanting to
Mm-hmm.
see what it's like in, exploring the world, meeting new people. I feel like each place, each person that I meet brings out a new side to me and to
Mm.
my creativity too. So I definitely think that traveling and running a business and stepping out and making new friends, or moving, I a move was part of my healing transitioned to was like, I moved an hour away. I mean, it wasn't that far away, an hour away to a small town where I knew no one, and like started healing in this new space too.
Yeah.
So I think there's like all these cool things that you can experience that add to your healing that aren't just, I've also done tons of therapy. I love therapy, but like getting out and experiencing
Mhm.
your life and trying new things, like that was so healing for me. Is the
Absolutely.
experiential part of it.
Yeah, I could not agree more. The reason I had this podcast was at the beginning of 2020 when the whole world kind of, went into mass chaos with the COVID-19 virus. It struck me that people needed more resources for healing and that not everybody could access therapy. Not everybody had the privilege of the resources that were the obvious forms of healing, And so this idea of beginning to just speak to, gosh, healing is available everywhere if we look through that lens. So I love that. I love what you're talking about. And a lot of the messages, Kristin, that you have in your marketing and just in, I think, believe the like kind of pillars of your business really speak to a lot of what we've been witnessing as a culture lately, probably always, but I think it's been highlighted lately. And you talk a lot about dismantling systems of oppression in spheres of influence, which I love. Can you just tell the audience a little bit more about what that means to you and the role that that plays in your own business and life?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think anything that is, anything that is society saying, here's the box that you need to fit in,
Mm-hmm.
is really harmful to us long term and to our creativity and our businesses. And I think when you start building something, you don't think at first that you have a sphere of influence, and then you realize that like as I'm building this thing, I've created a little world where I can have a lot of influence. I can facilitate conversations where we prioritize consent. I can pay people well. I can take a month off in the summer and give my work, give my team a month off in the summer. Like you can make choices that get us closer to the world that we want to see instead of being like, well, this is the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
Because society does like it has a box for everyone, especially if you aren't, you know, top of the food chain, um, a rich white male, there's a box for you that I think like when we go about that self liberation and break out of those boxes, that's where we find healing and freedom.
I could not agree more. There's so many ways I could take that, and I really think it is so pervasive that you know, I could be talking about body image or eating disorders, which I do a lot of work with. And my God, you see that everywhere. But, again, we might just be talking about the way you're looking at the way you, I don't know, go about your day. The way you wake up and, you eat breakfast first thing in the morning. As silly as it sounds, when I talk to my clients about food, I'll often say, check in and see, are you even hungry? And kind of explain to them that the reason we eat the way we do is based on a farming schedule that was really more appropriate to pre-industrial revolution agrarian kind of society. And it's fine if you want to eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner at those same times, but at least understand that you don't have to, that the thinking is somewhat bureaucratic and that it's just the way we do it. So it's really giving people back that
Yeah,
power that comes from within them. And I love the idea of
totally.
taking a month off and giving you, I mean, yeah, like what came up for me as you said that was, whoa, and then I thought, no, that's what everybody wants. Everybody would want that, you
It's
know?
funny because you would think everyone wants that, and yet because of that societal conditioning, it takes people when I'm coaching them sometimes months to get to the place where they would allow themselves to do that. Like you run a business where you can create almost to, almost infinitely whatever you want,
Mm-hmm.
and yet we're so comfortable with the way things have always been done. the 9 to 5 work day, the overworking on the weekends, the constantly being available to everyone who wants you at any time of the day on 5 different platforms, the, like burned out, exhausted, like that is what is our baseline as a society. So when you say, or when I tell a client, why don't you try taking Tuesdays off? It could take months for that to actually sink in and be something they even try. Or why don't you take a week off in the summer? Like, we don't even jump to a month right away, like, or why don't you outsource folding your laundry or something that is like, what? I can't do that. Like, there are so many ways that we feel like we are supposed to be, especially, women, especially mothers. We're supposed to be this, we're supposed to be that, we're supposed to look great doing all of it. And it's not possible, like it's not possible to do all of that well and maintain a healthy sense of self. So, that's kind of what, when I say like breaking down those systems, being a dangerous creative, it's like, okay, but it's constantly asking the question, but why do I have to do it that way? Why do I do it that way in the first place?
Mm-hmm.
Was that my idea or was that someone else's idea?
I love that. I often find myself referencing an analogy that I once heard, which is that humans are, and I'm going to botch this, but something to the effect of humans are like tigers walking around in cages with the doors open. And I mean, every time I hear people say things such as what you said, that's the image that comes to me. And it's so true. It's like the door's open, but we will not leave. And I am that way too. So it takes me a very long time to let go because I'm human. We're all human. We're all swimming in it. It's really interesting. So as you've been traveling, and we love to infuse a little fun in the podcast because conversations they're more fun to listen to when there's a lot of fun being discussed. So you could go on a lot of places, and a lot of times we'll ask our guests, if you could go anywhere in the world, where would you go? That said, you've gone a lot of places. So where is your favorite place that you've gone so far?
What was it? 2020 feels like 5 years,
Oh, I know.
I don't know what time is.
Me either.
Before COVID, in 2019, I shot a wedding in Paris and took a friend with me, and we then went to Turkey, to a town called Cappadocia, where every morning they send up thousands of hot air balloons every single morning that there's good weather. So you wake up at sunrise and the whole landscape is just covered with rainbow hot air balloons. It is stunning. The landscape is so unique. It's like rocky pillars and hills, and it's just like nothing I've ever seen. And the food was delicious. So I for sure would go back to Turkey and would say that was one of my favorite places I've been. I want to go back and lead a retreat there or do a wedding there or something because it was just so stunning.
That's so neat. And I've never heard of a place where every morning they launch hot air balloons. So I'm sitting here with my mouth open like, what? Wow. Like, you hear something, you don't hear something new every day. So it's kind of cool. I'm like, and that's one of the great things about travel. And again, just we're talking about expanding our minds, right? Like, why do I do this? It's like travel is so fantastic for expansion because you're exposed to things like that it would never dawn on me to do. But when you said it, I was like, that's magic. That sounds so magical.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, when you talk about inner child healing or, your authentic self, I'm like, when I'm traveling, I am sexy. I am romantic. Mm-hmm. I want to run through the streets of Paris at midnight and make friends with everyone I see. I am trying to do more of those things in my day-to-day routine, but often I don't because I think we do feel overloaded with responsibility. Mm-hmm. And as much as I teach this and preach this, I still get caught up in the same cycles of I don't know how I just got burned out. I got burned out this last year and I'm having to majorly readjust things. And I'm like, damn it, I'd made all these changes. I tried all these things, and I learned all these lessons years ago. Why am I relearning them? And so it does feel like this cyclical thing. And so having those things built in where I'm like, I go, I go to Turkey to rediscover myself, or I go down the street on a walk to this coffee shop to rediscover myself. I have to build those into my routine because I do get bogged down with like back in the grind and I have to regularly shake myself out of it.
I, I could not agree more. And I think that's such an important message. Kristin, I'm really glad you brought that up because I think it's a trap that we fall into when we listen to podcasts where people or experts thinking that these people have gotten to this place and that we need to get to it too, and then we'll be, I don't know, there or healed, as though healed itself is actually a thing, as opposed to this idea that we're all on this journey together, healing and growing and learning. And this season, the focus is on how we heal and grow from our wounds and from our struggles, because same, just like you, I found myself teaching people about balance and in this real place of confusion and lack of balance. And, it was like, oh my gosh, like, teacher, take thy own advice sort of thing. And it was this up leveling for me that was just bringing me to a whole new level of awareness, but doing so in a way that was really messy. And, on the surface looked like burnout and all of these things. So I don't know that we ever stop kind of having to learn our lessons, but that perspective shift. And I love that even going to the coffee shop. Yes, just getting out of the routine, which is in essence what you're saying about question why you do things. Question why you work 9 to 5. Just question. I love it. I love this conversation we're having. And this kind of brings up something that I found really interesting and just wanted you to talk a little bit, which is about your experience living on the farmette. I know you talked about it a lot in your social, and maybe if you could just tell the audience what you did and what that was like, because again, it's so, talk about shaking up the routine.
Yeah, yeah. So this time last year, we were living in the house that I bought when I was going through my divorce. So it was a little town, a little small town. I got married, and so we decided to move. We bought this little farmette in the woods. It was an old historic home on 5 acres with a big garden, and kind of the thought process was like we want to be hosting, we want to have people over, we want to be more independent and kind of this like slower pace of life. I homeschooled my son last year during COVID. So we were really slowing down and just embracing being together and all the things that came along with that. There were more challenges that came with that than we expected, and we did end up just selling it yesterday actually and moved closer into town where we would be close to people. And this is, I would be curious what you think about this of sometimes when we build up a dream, we were managing and holding 2 houses because we turned the other one into an Airbnb. We like built up this dream, but I hadn't let anything else go. And really what I was doing was just like inadvertently piling more things on myself when the whole purpose was to simplify and to be grounded and to find peace. And what I actually did was the opposite. And so after a while, I was like, this is not what I set out to do with this decision. And so in this new season of life where my husband got a new job, that was a lot, like an hour away from where we lived, our choice to simplify and find peace meant moving closer in. So it's interesting. It was a short blip. But I think life changed so quickly in the last 2 years that coming back to that core reason of why we made that choice and why we made this choice was that inner peace and that simplicity and living life differently. But that first choice didn't actually end up helping us do that in the way that we thought it would.
It's interesting as you say that. It really brings me back to we were talking about dismantling systems of oppression, and I think about how we as a culture have been formed. And there's so much of our cultural narrative that is kind of built on this colonization, acquiring, manifest destiny, more, more, more. And if you look at just our cultural, what we accept and what we're good at, it is about acquiring and taking on more. We're not so good, bringing back to the conversation about grief, about letting go. And we don't have, there used to be rituals and ceremonies that really fortified that as part of the process. But I think our capitalist culture doesn't, we just don't have space for that. And so I think probably many of us have such comfort with take on new things, bring on new tasks, acquiring wonderful things, but we just aren't as unconsciously used to the idea of, and in order to do so, I need to let go. I heard a beautiful, beautiful metaphor or analogy, I suppose, about how nature can teach us most things, and how in nature we have perennials and we have annuals, and they're both really beautiful and they both serve a function, and how so much of our life is meant to be perennial, and we don't treat it that way. We try to make it an annual. We want it to be an annual. And so, I think I know it is for me. It can be so challenging to understand that there's no shame in letting go of something, that it's had a time and a purpose, and it's time to move on. I love that. Thank you for sharing that, because it is, again, such a beautiful message that letting go of something can be progress. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I love that. I love that visual with the perennials and the annuals.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a lot of metaphors with gardening when I was living at the
Yes.
farmette, of just how much work goes into something that's supposed to be so natural,
Mm.
and how much of it you don't see. So in business, there's so much work that goes on behind the scenes that you don't see. You just see the shiny
Mm.
wins that someone has, and not the years of hard work going into that. And with the perennial annual thing, I mean, we're all so clung to a relationship to be successful has to last until you're 100 years old, and you're I mean, Esther Perel talks about this, of letting go. Well, not everything is meant to be forever. Friendships, relationships, homes, businesses, everything it can still be good and not be forever. But yeah, we're very uncomfortable with that. If it was the right thing, it should last forever, right?
I know, of course. Yeah, you're supposed to know at 18 that you're going to be a doctor for the rest of your life and declare a major. Because, yeah, clearly an 18-year-old's going to know that.
And nothing else in nature works that way.
No!
Nothing else in nature is this is a beautiful flower that blooms for a million years. No, it
Exactly.
blooms and then it dies very quickly.
Right, exactly. And it's always, nature's always adapting and evolving and changing. And yeah, it's very interesting how against our nature we as a culture have become. And, I think that kind of brings me to my favorite question that I ask everybody, and each season it changes. But if we are so against our nature, then clearly everybody who is walking this planet struggles on some level. If you could go back to the moment you believe your own healing journey began, or you had kind of when you sort of came into awareness, if there's something you could tell yourself, a piece of advice, what would that be?
I think it does come back to the letting go and the grieving,
Mm.
of almost expecting grief. This is normal to have griefs come like waves. And expecting that, rather than being I did all the right things. I have all the things I set out to have. Now what? I had multiple moments like that in my life where I'm all right, I achieved all my goals. I'm 29. What do I do with the rest of my life? Or happened again at 33 recently. I was I did everything I said I wanted to do with my life. So what now? And that's kind of a depressing thought too. And so I've been playing around with this idea. It's a rough draft in my head. But like instead of thinking of life as this like, oh, it should just be this upward trajectory, you get to the mountaintop and then you're 100 years old and you die and that's the end. Now I just think of life kind of like a charcuterie board. I'm like, you're not supposed to only eat steak your whole life. Like maybe you get to try different things, try on different things, live on a farm for a year, realize you're not a farmer, like move somewhere else, like travel to this place. And that the beauty is in letting yourself try and experience and live and let go and grieve. And like that is the beauty,
Mm.
not the I achieved this thing and now I'm like the ultimate version of myself.
I love the charcuterie board image. I think that's so helpful. A friend once said to me, Becca, you didn't fail. You're just the kinesthetic learner. You just have to try things before you know. And I thought, oh yeah, so much more compassionate. But this idea of like, yeah, you get to be. What if you could be, a doctor and then you could go be an artist, or like our culture would never like. Why are you crazy? But it's like, what if? Thank you for bringing in the what if and just for the lovely work you do in the world and for sharing with our audience these ideas around just how challenging the why can be so helpful if you want to live your life as a dangerous creative. And I think we're all creatives on some level. So I'm loving that image of being a dangerous creative and letting it kind of be a different way to bring joy into your life.
Well, and I think life is creative work. And when I view life that way of, a good book has a climax, has a journey that the the main person goes through, hits a rough patch, like life is creative work. And my friend Natalie says this a lot of just like you are always co-creating with the universe and with everyone you come across. So it's that like yes, every single person who's listening to this podcast is a creative, whether your job is creative or not. Like you are creative, you get to create every day and you get to say, why can't I dance while I'm doing my accounting job? Why can't I, tell my clients I don't work on Saturdays and Sundays and Tuesdays, like there's so much that we get to create every day. And I've seen creativity be such a tool in healing, even just in like the daily act of making today cool or making today whimsical or romantic or anything like that. So thank you for having me on. It's been so fun.
Thanks so much for being with us today. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast so you're sure not to miss a single episode. And if you have a chance, we always appreciate the reviews. That's one way we are sure to get this podcast out to those who need to hear it. So thanks again, and we'll see you soon.